Good evening, welcome. I'm Hirsch Perlman, professor and chair of the UCLA Department of Art. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, James Benning. This lecture was made possible through the generous support of the William D. Feldman Family Endowed Lecture Fund. And as always, we're grateful to the Hammer Museum for continuing to host the UCLA Department of Art lectures. James Benning is a widely acclaimed experimental filmmaker. He's received grants from the Rockefeller Foundation, the Austrian Film Society, National Endowment for the Arts, and the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. In 2007, the Austrian Film Museum in Vienna presented a retrospective of his films. That same year, Benning embarked on the strange ambition to replicate the cabins of a famous 19th century author and an infamous 20th century author, Henry David Thoreau's shelter from Walden Pond and Ted Kaczynski's, AKA the Unabomber's, plywood shack from Montana, both of which Benning completed the following year on his property in the Sierra foothills. To date, 3 very different film meditations have come from the 2 cabins. Benning's installations have been staged at the Walker Art Center, Minneapolis, the Whitney Museum of American Art, New York, Argos Centre for Art and Media, Brussels. Earlier this year, he opened a solo museum exhibition titled Decoding Fear at Kunsthaus in Graz, Austria. And his films have shown throughout Asia, the Americas, and Europe. He teaches film and video at Cal Arts. Please join me in welcoming James Benning.
Thank you. I'm going to put in a DVD and see if this works. That's where we are. Now if the DVD shows up, there it is. Look at a little of this.
Sometimes I'm a mother and sometimes I'm a child. Hey, children, let's dance. Mommy, 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 dance.
you, trying to get that early bird. You know what I'm saying? That's where I grew up, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's the worst poverty in Milwaukee now. That was shot in 1997. It's part of my film Four Corners. I live here somewhere. Oop, that was too quick. Where are we? This is Washington Park. I grew up near here. This is a baseball field I spent many years at. This is the house I grew up in. Looks like an idyllic place in the middle of farmland, but it's the inner city. These houses have all been ripped down. This is probably from a year or two ago. There's new houses built here now. That's my bedroom window. This is the bars on the window that weren't there when I lived there. I don't live there anymore. In 2002, I moved to the Sierra Nevada mountains. I live about right here. That's my house. This is National Forest. I'm adjacent to that. That's my pickup truck. Front porch. Now I have a picture of it. This is my Facebook page. That's the house I live in. That's my wash. I moved there in 2002. I lived there half the time. When I got there, it was in perfect shape, but I tore the house all apart. Tore the walls down, tore the floor up, rewired, re-insulated, rebuilt the house. It took me 9 months. And then for the next 3 months, I built a second room down below here and put in these 3 windows and put in a bottom porch. Before, when I moved there, it just was on stilts, and it looked a bit like the house was going to fall over. But it looks kind of nice with the porch there. After I finished working on remodeling, I realized I lived in the middle of nowhere, and I had to try to figure out what I'd do there. And I thought I'd teach myself to paint. So I started by looking at the paintings of, excuse me. Bill Trailer. And I started to copy his paintings. Bill Trailer was born a slave in the 1850s, and he didn't start painting until he was 85. He spent 3 years in Montgomery, Alabama, on street corner, painting from his memory and painting from what he saw on the street. So after 3 years, he finished almost 2,000 paintings. There was a chronicle of his life, both from memory and from the present. Let me see if I can find a better page. That's issue. This is also an anti-tech lecture. I'm going to bumble through these things. Okay, this is what I wanted. This is the wall of his paintings at the museum, American Folk Art Museum. And they're pretty big. Anyway, I worked for almost like 6 or 7 months copying his paintings. And I got very interested in him because he was obsessive, and I was becoming very obsessive. And I thought by doing the same kind of work he was doing, I ended up doing about 100 of his paintings. I'd start to felt the same kind of obsession that he had. And I actually learned how to paint quite well from studying him. What I was really interested in is the way he would use negative space and the way he would position things on the frame. And it talked to me a lot about my own framing and filmmaking. And then I started to reconsider how I myself would find the frame. And then after about 6 months of that, I thought I had so much fun remodeling my house that I wanted to do a construction project. And I thought I'd like to build a house. And then I realized, well, I'm too old to build a house. So I thought I could build a small house. And in the around 1997, the same time that I made Four Corners, which the first film clip was from, I had taught in Korea for 6 weeks during the summer. And when I went to their library, one of the only books in English was Thoreau's Walden, and so I reread it while I was there. And I became a great fan of that book. Especially the first first part of the chapter, sounds, which this first paragraph made me think about my own practice of looking and listening and paying attention. So I'll read that paragraph for you. But while we are confined to books, although the most select and classic, and read only particular written languages which are themselves but dialects and provincial, we are in danger of forgetting the language which all things and events speak without metaphor, which alone is copious and standard. Much is published, but little printed. The rays which stream through the shutter will no longer what is this? Wait, the rays which stream through the shutter will be no longer remembered when the shutter is wholly removed. No method nor discipline can supersede the necessity of being forever on the alert. What is a course of history or philosophy or poetry, no matter how well selected, or the best society, or the most admirable routine of life compared with the discipline of looking always at what is to be seen? Will you be a reader, a student merely, or a seer? Read your faith, see what is before you, and walk into futurity. When I read this, it very much moved me, and about 4 years later, I decided to teach a class. Pardon my cough, I somehow have this lingering illness. When I decided to teach a class about looking and listening, and I wrote a course description for it, forgetting that I had read this particular paragraph. And a few years later, when I reread the course description, I noticed that it was almost exactly what this paragraph had said. So I somewhat plagiarized Thoreau to create this rather infamous class that I teach now. But I think it's quite a beautiful sentiment, and one we should live by. So what I'm getting at, I thought, well, I can't build a big house, but I could build a cabin. And then this Thoreau cabin came to mind. And the nice thing about the Thoreau cabin is there were no pictures taken of it. Where is solitude? No, economy. Where is economy? There. D, is it C or D? Yeah, so here's a picture of Thoreau's cabin as envisioned by the museum at Walden Pond. This is what they thought he might have built. And the nice thing about Walden, the book, is that he really describes the cabin quite well. Here you see that it was 10 feet wide by 15 feet long. And then he describes the cost of each thing. The boards were $8.03.5. Total cost of building it was $28.12.5. It cost me $12,000 to build mine. I think my nails cost a lot more than $28.12.5. But when I built it, I wasn't really trying to make a replica of his cabin, but I used it as somewhat of a model as to the size and the shape of the cabin. And then I went to Home Depot and I bought sheetrock. I didn't do lath and plaster. And I bought very expensive designer windows and ended up building a rather fancy addition. That's it. And then when I finished building it, I had also started to copy other outsider artists' work that were just as obsessive as Bill Traylor, Mose Tolliver, Martin Ramirez, and Henry Darger. And so I had a number of different artists' paintings at this time, and I put them inside of this cabin. And then it somewhat scared me because all of a sudden it wasn't about just learning how to paint or a construction project, but it started to speak to me as something that was saying something important. A bit like it was starting to look like art. But I wasn't quite satisfied with it because it seemed to need a counterpoint. I should probably maybe go back to, well, in the 1960s I studied mathematics and I have a master's degree in math. And my master's dissertation or thesis was on theoretical statistics. And I was lucky enough in the late 60s to be able to use a 1620 IBM computer with punch cards. So my dissertation or thesis was used with the availability of a very early computer. It had a lot less power than this little computer here, and it probably filled the room almost half this size with tubes and air conditioning, and so it was quite slow, but it was kind of the beginning of computing that was being available to people outside of the military and government. So I got very excited about computers at that time. And then in 1964, I finally bought a desktop computer, and I made a work called Pascal's Lemma, which maybe I can show you some of that. It was an installation that I installed at the kitchen. No, I don't want it in Photoshop. I always do that. Excuse me. So this was written in not in Fortran but in BASIC, which is a very low-level programming language. And so everything you see here is all the lines and things are drawn with equations from the BASIC language. And you can see my old computer in this from 1984. So it's a beginning of kind of a love-hate relationship with technology. And, there's a number of things in here that complain about the computer, and yet it's somewhat of a celebration of that machine. And at the very beginning, I was very ambivalent about technology itself. So it's somewhat understated in this piece, but it's a beginning of those ideas for myself. And then also in 1984, I made a film called American Dreams. And this is a still from that. And when I made that film in the early 80s, my daughter was getting interested in baseball, so I was taking her to baseball card conventions to look at old baseball cards. And I started to collect the cards of Henry Aaron. And then I got obsessive with that, and I wanted to get every Henry Aaron card that was made during his career, which was from 1954 to 1975, which was kind of the years of my own coming of age. And I decided to make this film where I would film all of the baseball cards and show the backs from the fronts from each year, and then the backs from each year. And during the front, you would hear a political speech from that year, and when you saw the backs of the cards, you would hear a piece of popular music from that year. So the years from 1954 to 1975 were being described through political speeches and popular culture. And when I got to that point in the film, it was kind of like the same thing when I got to the point of building the Thoreau cabin with the folk art inside, thinking it was fine, but it needed some kind of counterpoint to what I was doing. So I added a handwritten text by Arthur Bremer. Arthur Bremer is from Milwaukee, where I grew up, and he ended up stalking Nixon and trying to kill Nixon in '72. And then went on to shoot George Wallace. And he was captured and put in prison, and he was released 2 years ago, the only attempted assassin ever to be released from a prison in the United States. So he's out and free in Maryland, but he can't leave the state. But my idea here was to add this text of Bremer, and Bremer, it's written in the first person, and he talks about Milwaukee and he talks about politics. And so when you start to read the diary, you get the idea that it could be my diary, and then it gets rather bizarre, and then you might think it's my alter ego, and then by the end of the film, you understand that he's shot Wallace, and then he's identified as Bremer. In this piece, I was very interested in this kind of counterpoint between the baseball cards, this kind of as popular culture, and the music, and then political speeches that were from different politicians, to Malcolm X, Angela Davis, Helen Collicott, who was one of the early people fighting for improvement in the environment from Australia. So there were a lot of different political positions that are radical political positions that were taken in this piece. So when I decided to add a second cabin, I decided to do Kaczynski's cabin in the same spirit as adding Bremer to the American Dreams, and this is my copy of Kaczynski's cabin. This was rather easy to do because it was well documented, unlike the Thoreau cabin. Well, that's not how you spell Richard. and this is Kaczynski's cabin, not in a New York loft or a gallery, but in the FBI holding facility in Sacramento. It had been removed from Montana. And he was able to, in that shot before, you could see he brought it outside of that facility and put black drop paper behind it, and then was able to film all 4 elevations of it. And here you can see a piece of plywood that's 4 by 8, so I was able to completely scale the dimensions off of Richard Barnes's photographs, allowing me to make an exact copy of it. So this became this kind of counterpoint to it, and then I added other paintings in this by Joseph Yoakum and Black Hawk and a few other painters. So it also had artwork in it. And then I also built a library in it. When Kaczynski was arrested, they found 278 books in his cabin, and I was astonished that many of them I had read, and then I realized that the reason I had is that we had gone to school at the same time. He went to Harvard, and I went to the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. And by that time, the Harvard curriculum was being spread around the country. So the same books that Harvard was suggesting to read, we were reading at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. So I decided to build a library in my cabin that would be half from Kaczynski's library and half from my library. This is the most recent edition of that library. Can you read those? If I scroll up, I'll give my voice a little bit of, do we have water? No. I ordered them by size, so there's weird juxtapositions. Here's the Arthur Bremer diary of an assassin, or an assassin's diary, that I included to make a reference back to American Dreams. When I planned to add the Bremer diary to American Dreams, I thought I was going to have to make up a diary, so I went to the library to do research on Bremer. And on the very first day out, I found that he already had written a diary, so I didn't have to create my own about him. So I just, well, in the 60s it was, or in the 50s it was called Stealing, and then the 60s it was Liberating. The 70s, what was it called? Sampling? Can't remember. Oh no, Appropriating. The 80s was Sampling. Somewhere it became Pirating, and it's just Stealing. But the library is quite nice. Rachel, I think you're right here. You should read that book. So after working on this project for about 5 years, I also added beds that I copied the exact architecture of Kaczynski's bed and also of Thoreau's, and also Kaczynski's table and Thoreau's table. And so they became more domesticated, and when people visit me, some like to sleep in one cabin or the other. One becomes more popular. I like the unpopular one. Here's the bookshelf. Here you can see how I arrange them by size. This is a nice shelf. Boy in a Battery was Hollis Frampton's favorite book. It's quite good. But you can see how they change from this. Oh, thank you. And there's 11 different stacks, and that's what I was going through before. Anyways, it became quite exhaustive work, and it's still going on. I'm still adding things to it. I changed the library, changed the paintings somewhat. And then I thought, well, I have a rather unusual work, but I'm not sure how I can show this work, because I don't want hundreds of people coming through my backyard. Although if you can find it, that's fine. So I talked with Julie Alt, a good friend of mine, and she suggested that we should create a book, and that's what we did. And this is the FC Two Cabins by J.B., which was edited by Julie Alt. And it has text by Kaczynski and Thoreau, and it also has myself. I wrote biographies for the 8 different artists that are in the cabins, and then I also wrote a biography for Henry Aaron and for Arthur Bremer, and also for Thoreau and Kaczynski. So there's 12 people that I write biographies from. And then Julie Alt also wrote a text, and Dick Hebditch wrote a wonderful text also. So I'm very proud of this book. It also has pictures in it. Here's somebody looking at one of those pictures. Okay, enough of that. So that was the first way of presenting this work. And then I decided, well, I could also make films that would spin off of this particular work. So the first one I made was Two Cabins, and I think I might have a little of that. Yes, it's here. We'll watch just a short part. This is a half-hour film, and there's 15 minutes that you look out of the Kaczynski or the Thoreau window. At some point, a train goes by, and then there's 15 minutes looking out of the Kaczynski window. So what you have is two views out of the two cabins. So you get a sense of the interior space of each of the cabins, and then the soundtracks aren't from my cabins, but I went to Walden Pond, and I also went to Lincoln, Montana, and I made sound recordings from the exact locations of where the Walden Pond cabin was and where the Kaczynski cabin was. So you have this displacement of sound from the actual places that the two cabins existed. And then I made a second film called Nightfall, which I don't have an example of, which is a 97-minute movie that's made in the mountains up higher from where I live. And it's simply 97 minutes of the woods going to blackness from late afternoon. And there's no wind and no movement. So all you see is the changing of light going from late afternoon till dark. And it also, it's the sound is synced, shot sync sound, so you hear the change in the sound from late afternoon to night, which is quite dramatic. And I've shown that film in a number of places around the world, and it's kind of incredible, the audience reaction. It's kind of a group Zen experience that just gets locked into that film. And then I made a third film called Stemple Pass, which is basically about the Kaczynski cabin, and I'll show you a little of that. But I'm also making a second film that I'm almost finished with now, called Concord Woods, which is about the Thoreau cabin. And in Stemple Pass, what you hear is you see three different half-hour shots off of my main porch, the building that I showed you, where my main house, looking to the south with the Kaczynski cabin in the foreground. And then in each of the sections, I read from four different texts from Kaczynski, mainly from journal entries. So I'll show you a little of that.
I explored to the east along the high ridge, reached a high peak and then turned back. Very fine views, though somewhat obscured by trees. Many of the trees are very old, with thick trunks, but not very tall, apparently stunted, which is probably why they were never logged off. Near the high peak at which I turned back, I saw a grouse, but couldn't get a shot at it. Shot 2 squirrels on the way back. Expenditure, 322 cartridges for a quantity of meat which I estimate to be equivalent to a can of fish. When almost back to the cabin, I wasted one cartridge trying to shoot a rabbit, which I missed. I should have gotten it, but was tense and over anxious because I hadn't shot a rabbit before, and because it would have been a pretty big chunk of meat compared to these little squirrels. Went up on the ridge to work on a lean-to for a camp, which I hope to use as a base for further exploration. Saw no game, probably because it was windy and snowing heavily, and squirrels don't seem to like bad weather. Went on a minor exploring walk to the relatively low peak northeast of the cabin. Shot nothing today, but need no meat since my ration plan includes a can of fish for today. 1 can per week. The rest of the day I spent as follows. Made candles and made a candle holder to catch the wax. Worked on putting trim around the door to keep the weather out. Made hooks from a coat hanger and attached them to the wall to hang my rifles on. One more step towards solving the problem of where to put things in this tiny place. Relatively warm again today. Was out for 4 or 5 hours. Just above the springs, which are the source of the stream which runs by the cabin. There's a beautiful ravine closed in by tall trees. Here I saw a group of 3 deer. Later on a ridge I saw a substantial herd.
So there's about 15 minutes of text being read, and then you see 15 minutes of just the landscape. So the landscape comes back after the text is read, and it's this is fall.
Positioned.
This is winter.
As it was, mainly his right arm was hit. Witnesses said whole arm exploded, blood all over the place. One newspaper said arm was mangled. Another said it was shattered and that he would never recover full use of arm and hand. Also, there was damage to one eye. One paper said the small computer lab was destroyed. This is improbable. I was relieved to read what kind of guy sprung the trap. I worried about that some young kid, undergraduate, not even computer science major, might get it. But the guy clearly typical member of technical class. Might even be one of the guys that have flown those fucking jets over my house. This gives me great relief to my choking, frustrated anger and sense of impotence against the system. At the same time, must admit I feel badly about having crippled the man's arm. It has been bothering me a good deal. This is embarrassing because while my feelings are partly from pity, I'm sure they come largely from training, propaganda, and brainwashing we all get. But do not get the idea that I regret what I did. Relief of frustrated anger outweighs uncomfortable conscience. I would do it all over again. So many failures with feeble, ineffective bombs were driving me desperate with frustration. Have to get revenge for all the wilderness being fucked up by the system. Further search of newspapers yield Hauser's arm was severed or nearly severed. Tips of three fingers torn off. Hauser, father of 3 kids. He was afraid his dream was ruined. Dream was to be astronaut. I am no longer bothered having crippled this guy. Partly because I just got over it with time. Partly because his aspiration was so ignoble. Searched other newspapers. Found no reference to Boeing bomb. Seems inexplicable. It was designed and built with such care that malfunction seems highly improbable. Recently I camped in a paradise-like glacial cirque. At evening, beautiful singing birds were ruined by the obscene roar of jet planes. Laughed at the idea of having any compunction about crippling airplane pilot. Summer of 1981, I began hearing disagreeable noises of machinery, sometimes surprisingly loud depending on meteorological conditions. Following winter, many otherwise pleasant excursions were ruined for me by the moaning and howling of these iron monsters, audible for miles over the hills. Made up my mind to get revenge, but it was difficult to determine just where noise was coming from. Had to wait for summer anyway, since my tracks could easily be followed in snow. But noise seemed to stop in spring. Then I began hearing it again in late summer, 1982. I followed the noise to find it came from a logging operation in Willow Creek drainage, logging off one of my favorite wild spots, pushing trees over with bulldozers instead of cutting with saws. When they left for the day, I went in and found the whole surface of the ground stripped right off. They left a 5-gallon can of oil sitting on their machine that they used to pick up logs and load them on truck. I poured oil over the machine's engine and set fire to it. Spent pleasant nights sleeping out on top of the mountain and came home leisurely in the morning. I felt so good after having done this, though I might uneasy over the risk of being suspected. A few years ago, some fuckers built a vacation house just across Stemple Pass Road. Motorcycle and snowmobile fiends. They would buzz up and down road past my cabin on most weekends, summer and winter. Last summer they were worse than usual, sometimes made it a 3-day weekend. It was getting absolutely intolerable. My heart was going bad. Any emotional stress, anger above all, makes it beat irregularly. It got so that the constant cycle noise was choking me with anger, heart going wild. Risky to commit crime so close to home, but I figured if I didn't get those guys, the anger would literally kill me. So one night in fall, I sneaked over there, though they were home, and stole their chainsaw, buried it in a swamp. A couple of weeks later, I chopped my way into their house. Smashed up interior pretty thoroughly. It was a real luxury place. They also had a mobile home there. I broke into that too, found silver painted motorcycle inside, smashed it up with my axe. They had 4 snowmobiles sitting outside. I thoroughly smashed engines of those with the axe. A week or so later, cops came up here and asked if I had seen anyone fooling around any buildings around here. Also asked if I had any problems with motorcycles. The truth crossed their minds, but probably they did not seriously suspect me. Otherwise their questioning would not have been so perfunctory. I am pleased I was so collected in answering cops' questions. May 1982, I sent a bomb to a computer expert named Patrick Fisher. His secretary opened it. One paper said she was in hospital, in good condition, with arm and chest cuts. Other papers said bomb drove fragments of wood into her flesh, but no indication that she was permanently disabled. Frustrating that I can't seem to make lethal bomb. Revenge attempts have been gobbling much time, impending other work, but I must succeed, must get revenge. Not long after foregoing, I think June or July, I went to University of California, Berkeley, placed in computer science building a bomb consisting of a pipe bomb and gallon can of gasoline. According to paper, Vice Chairman of Computer Science Department picked it up. He was considered to be out of danger of losing any fingers, but would need further surgery for bone and tendon damage in hand. Apparently pipe bomb went off but did not ignite gasoline. I don't understand it. Frustrated. Traveling expenses for such raids are very hard on my slender financial resources. Last summer, dynamite blast was booming all over the hills, occasionally audible at my cabin. Exxon conducting seismic exploration for oil. Couple of helicopters flying over the hills, lower a thing with dynamite on cable, make blast on ground, instruments measure vibrations. Early August I went and camped out, hoping to shoot up a helicopter in an area east of Crater Mountain. Proved harder than I thought, because helicopters always in motion. Only once had a half chance, 2 quick shots, as copter crossed space between 2 trees. Both missed. When I got back to camp, I cried, partly from frustration of failing, but mostly grief at about what is happening to this countryside. It is so beautiful. But if they find oil, disaster. Even if they don't find oil, the blasts and helicopters ruin it. Out by the media. Hence it will have no practice.
Anyway, that's kind of an abridged viewing of that. I'm sorry about that. It's it accumulates at a better rate if you actually watch the film. I wanted you to see that. And then, like I said, I'm making this new film that will have Thoreau's text, and it'll just be 2 one-hour shots of the Thoreau cabin. And I shot those at the summer and winter solstice. So you'll just have 2 one-hour shots, and I read from parts of Walden, and then I also read from a text that Thoreau wrote about John Brown, the terrorist that was executed by the government when he was found guilty of invading Harper's Ferry. And Thoreau is one of the only radical intellectuals that was supporting Brown, that stayed supporting him after he was arrested and executed. And on the morning of that execution, Thoreau read a long text about John Brown himself, which is quite an amazing radical text. So that's in this 4th film that I'm making. And then I built an installation, and I showed it Neuger Riemschneider in Berlin, and this is a installation of the 2 cabins film that I showed you, and it also has the Thoreau desk here and a replica or the same kind of typewriter that Kaczynski wrote the manifesto on. This is set on a plywood base, the same kind of plywood Kaczynski used to build his cabin, and this is setting on lath and plaster, the same materials that Thoreau used to build his cabin. And then with that also was the bookshelf that's in the cabin. Here it is removed into a gallery space and looks rather important here. But the big show of this occurred this past spring in Graz at the museum in Graz. A very strange looking building, and I had the whole 2nd floor to mount that show. And I've never had a big poster, so I want to show you that. It's very impressive. So there's a lot of installations in this museum show, and I'll go through them quickly because I want to have time for questions and things. The first thing you saw was a installation of Pascal's lemma, which I showed you about before. playing on a small laptop computer. So you have the 1984 NEC computer inside of a laptop. And there's a cord that comes out of the wall to power this particular machine. And then I made a replica of Andy Warhol's electric chair. So we have 2 electric chairs here. So that was the beginning part of that, the first thing you'd see when you come in from one side. And this you saw already, that's just a still of. This is the silk screen I did. It's not the same photo that Warhol used, but it's the same electric chair. And then the director of the museum wanted to move my cabins from my hillside to Austria, and I said, I don't think that's a good idea. So we talked a bit, and then I thought, let's build architectural models, but let's build them life-size. So that's what we did. This is the Thoreau cabin. So you don't get a sense of the materials, but you get a sense of the space. And you could walk inside of these. And I like the way it just fit into the museum. That's this is with the lights down a little bit. And that's the Kaczynski cabin. They were really quite beautiful. And this show is moving to Hamburg in February, so it'll be viewable again. The inside is, we had the lighting. This is the back window of the Kaczynski cabin. And then we have the paintings from the 2 cabins. These are the paintings that were hanging in my cabins in the Sierra Nevada. And then a text from a Kaczynski text from one of his journals. I don't know if you can see that. With his handwriting, but copied onto. So this is one of the texts that I would have read in the early texts. Well, maybe not, because this has number coded, and it's kind of interesting. Not when you can't read it, though. But I'll hurry on, because I want to show you the paintings. This is Bill Traylor. Are those, they look all right. Should I bring them? They look good enough, right? I don't have to bring them into Photoshop. They look a little better. But that's one of my copies. Trailer. This is Most Tolliver. Self-portrait. Early Most Tolliver, probably from the late 1970s. Henry Darger, Vivian girls, throwing hand grenades. My kind of girls. Martin Ramirez, who was in a mental institution for most of his life, and they allowed him to make his own paper and do drawings, and he's made some quite remarkable work. He remained mute all the time he was there, but he really wasn't mute. This is Jesse Howard, Missouri farmer who filled his farm hillside with wonderful signs, and was a great influence on Jenny Holzer. These are in the Kaczynski cabin. The first 4 were in the Thoreau cabin. This is William Hawkins, who lived in Ohio. Kind of a shyster of a guy, but a good painter. And this is Joseph Yoakum, who lived in Chicago and claimed to be a Navajo Indian, but I don't think he was. He did all these beautiful sexualized landscapes with a ballpoint pen and then watercolor. And then this is Black Hawk from the Plains Indian drawings from the 1880s. He would hallucinate and make these kind of paintings from fasting for 10 days. And they're from the leisure drawings. Are you familiar with those? Indian leisure drawings. Anyway, these are some of my favorite people. They have real passion in their work. So those were installed like this, and then next to it was that journal. Maybe I can show it a little better. It's interesting because the journals generally are in English. Sometimes they go. These are Kaczynski's journals. Sometimes they're in Spanish, and then they'll also go when they become sensitive. They go into numbered code, and the numbered code can be. If you know how to do it, you can figure out what it is. And the nice thing is, FBI could not decode this. And then they found a key to the code. And then when they auctioned off this stuff, they not only sold all of the journals, but they also sold the key to the code. So I was able to decipher all of this by writing a computer program that helped me do that. Okay. And then we also, in the museum, we also had the same installation that I had done in Berlin, and that was on loan from the person who owns that now. And then I also made a quilt because I wanted to reference the Gee's Bend quilt makers. They're a collective of Native American, Black American, African American women in Gee's Bend that is geographically isolated, so their African culture remained intact. And in the 30s, it was one of the poorest counties in America. And the women became very politicized, and during the 60s, they had started this quilt co-op, where they sold quilts to help finance civil rights actions. And they became very involved in the marches in Selma and in Montgomery. So they're quite interesting people, and I thought that I wanted to have in the middle of all this male stuff, this masculine nightmare in a sense, some kind of sanity. So I made this quilt out of jeans. And in the background is a birthday card piece. I have only written to Ted a few times, and one of the things I sent him a birthday card. This is the envelope I sent it in. Of course, this is a facsimile because I sent this away. So I made a second one for myself. And then this is the card, so this is a second card. It's quite a wonderful structural card about, it says Happy Birthday, Ted, and then I signed it. Can you read that? It's about happy birthday Happy Birthday to You being a structural piece. And it doesn't work with the word Ted, but it does with Henry, which refers to Henry David Thoreau and Ted Kaczynski. But I say, nevertheless, happy birthday, dear Ted. And so Ted wrote me back a postcard. And it, I thought it was an eggplant, but it's a pepper where the color faded. And then it's a wonderful text. It says, Dear James, thanks for birthday greeting. Happy birthday to you too next time you have a birthday. He's very funny. And then at the museum we also installed Stemple Pass so you could go in and hopefully, this is a problem of course with a film that should be seen from beginning to end, and installing it at a museum where the attention span isn't the same as in a theater. But some people did stay. And you have the opportunity to see it more than once this way. Or you come in and you look at it for a while and you go out and look at other things and come back, and it's a different season. So it's a completely different experience than a theatrical experience. And then outside of that was the wall that tells them about, and then there's these two framed, which are they're letters, a two-page letter that Kaczynski wrote to Scientific America. He typed it, and so I have the same kind of typewriter, so I was able to make a facsimile of it. But it's pretty much complaining about the arrogance of scientists and how they put us in danger. And it's quite an interesting letter, which was never published in Scientific America. It went right to the FBI. And the interesting thing is the second page, where he invites you to print in Scientific America. But authenticity of the letter can be found by an identifying number that the Times has, and then he shows the fourth paragraph of a letter that he sent to the Times, which is kind of, can you read that one? I'll let you read that one. I cut it off, didn't I? Yeah. And so that letter's in it, and then there was some objects and another film, and I'll play a little of this film, which is called Data Entry, and this is all about the decoding. There's two notebooks here that have coded numbers in them that have to be decoded, and this is a printout of a computer printout of the program that I wrote that helps decode these two. And then there's a framed page here of decoding that I did by hand when Dick Hebditch was visiting me up in my place in the mountains and writing text for the Two Cabins book. He was curious about my decoding, so I showed him how it worked doing the decoding by hand, so that's what's in this frame. And then the book, this is the Two Cabins book that's opened to the page of the decoding that's decoded here. And then that same decoding is being done on this video called Data Entry, and I'll play you a little of that. You might recognize the computer. I'm almost done now. Let's see, where were we over here? And then there was one other installation of, I made a film called RR, which is a 2 hour and think, 15-minute film of 47 trains from all over the U.S. And then, which was a 16 millimeter film. And then I made a sequel to that on digital. That's a 3-hour and 15-minute single-shot film in one place in the Mojave Desert, where 13 trains pass by, and those 3 hours and 15 minutes. And those two films are opposed to each other, 16 on one side and the digital film on the other. And I just have some slides of those. There's also a text written by Thoreau about the railroad, so that was part of it. And this is a facsimile that I made of the text of his journal entry. And there's his faked signature. Anyways, it's a nice text about the railroad that goes close to his cabin, and you hear the train in the two cabins. I didn't play that part in one of the window shots, but you hear the train go by. That's at Walden Pond. And this is the 16 millimeter projector with an hour. I think there was a little over an hour each reel, so there were 2 reels. And it was projected with the computer, with the projector in the space, and then this would be rethreaded as almost a performance every hour, so that you were very aware of the apparatus itself and the 16 millimeter film and the noise of the projector. And then on the other side, opposed to that, was the digital. This is pointing that way, so the digital projector's up here that you can't see. And this is the same shot that also goes, it's late in the afternoon and it goes into dusk. And 13 trains, they come like this, and they go around, and then way in the background they come this way across. So you kind of see them twice in the frame. And then I had a pile of text that was on newsprint that people could take, and this is that text that I read to you from the Thoreau from Walden about looking and listening. And this is a silk screen that I created and printed it on newspaper so they could easily, we had a stack of 500 of them that would last that long. And then when these disappeared, I've also printed this silk screen on very nice paper and framed it, and we just leaned the frame piece against this, whatever they're called. Yeah. All right. I'm done. Sorry about that. All right. Oh, I want to show you this that I showed you at the very beginning. There's my house and truck. This is the Thoreau cabin, and that's the Kaczynski cabin. So far, the tax people haven't realized I added to my property. Bastards. All right. Shut down. Again, I apologize for my cough. Now it's your turn, yes?
James, thanks a lot. Great presentation. I really appreciate it. I showed your film Tabletop in my Pixel Vision Festival. It's 24 years still showing toy video camera films. I can get you a copy, no problem. Tell us what attracted you to using this toy video camera, and did you ever make a second Pixel Vision film?
No, I gave mine away to my daughter, and then she made those famous. So I didn't want to compete with that.
And what attracted you to that tool?
Oh, it was $90, and it was on audio tape. I thought that's kind of bizarre. It was just a curiosity, really. And when I gave it to her, she wanted a nice camera, so she was disappointed. But then she liked it. Yeah, I like toys. So. Yeah. Yes.
Many years ago, you taught a lot about the dangers of filmmaking very early on, and I wondered if you could say something about what you've learned about the dangers of filmmaking over the last, I think it was almost 40 years ago when I last
You guys are
asked you about.
You're scaring me. I made this little 3-minute film in 1974.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
That was kind of influenced by a Hollis Frampton kind of optically printed film where you kind of stutter out an answer. And somebody asked me about something, and I said, I thought it was dangerous to be recorded on film because then it would be permanent and people would believe you thought that when they'd see it, and that I wasn't even sure I believed in what I was saying now. Now, it was kind of a joke film, but filmmaking is dangerous because it's not truth 24 times a second. It certainly can be a lie, and most cinema that I hate creates false drama, and when there's drama in every day, and I'm much more interested in that. So I'm interested in observation now and not making scary films. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. This is my first introduction to you, and it was wonderful. Something that I was really interested in is that you studied math, and mathematicians have like a history of like obsession, and your work seems to show that you have that same irk as well, like that same tick. And I was wondering, how, what made you move from math to visual art in this way?
I think I was lazy when I was in school, and I studied theoretical statistics, which gets almost to the point where art gets creative, or math gets creative. But I didn't. If I would be young now, and I probably wouldn't become an artist, I would do number theory, and I would get involved in that kind of abstract thinking that I really think is quite amazing. But now people ask me, oh, your films are mathematical. You make 13 lakes, 13 shots, 10 minutes each. But that isn't the mathematic. That's arithmetic, right? That isn't very interesting. But what I'm most influenced by in mathematics is my favorite proof is proving that the square root of 2 is irrational. And that's a really complex idea, that the square root of 2 can't be defined, that it goes on forever, 2.414 or whatever, it goes and it never ends. So we can only tell you what it is between two upper and lower bounds, right? And those upper and lower bounds get closer together as you add more digits to pi. So it's a very complex idea that the square root of 2 is irrational, that a number can be irrational, and yet that can be proven with 10th grade algebra. And it's totally elegant, the solution, because it's so simple. And that's what I think I like about mathematics, is when you find really complex ideas can have really kind of simple solutions. And when I look at my art practice, that's what I strive for, because I learned that in mathematics.
Thank you.
No morality question, so.
So I really love the way the camera doesn't pan or move, it just sits. And can you say something about that? The framing?
Well, yes. The camera has more discipline than we have. When you set it up and you make a frame, it doesn't look away. And so I can make a frame that stays on there, and it allows you to study a particular thing without looking away. And the cinema audience has a contract that's strong, that when you sit down, you watch it. I mean, you can get up and leave, but more than likely you'll stay and watch it. So if I show you a lake from 13 Lakes, you watch it for 10 minutes. If I took you to any one of those lakes, you wouldn't watch it for 10 minutes. You couldn't do that. So the contract in the theater and cinema is stronger than real life. And that really interests me, that we have an apparatus that people have agreed to follow without being distracted. And because you have that tool, you can look deeper and you can really observe something and learn something from duration and time. So that's what really interests me about what I'm doing now, that I can provide information that's stronger than life itself, which is kind of bizarre. You know, it's different though. It's not the reality. It's always my metaphor for reality, what I'm showing you. But I tried.
Do you think by not moving the camera, it becomes more about time in some way?
Well, it does that, but it also, when you lessen the amount of variables, then you can study. If the camera's moving back and forth, then that variable is getting in the way of looking at that particular thing. So, but if you take that variable out of it, then it's like an experiment, right? You want to control. It's a control of things that you're studying. I mean, it sounds kind of fascist, but I don't mean it that way. Yeah.
When you shot the digital 3.5-hour piece, do you set up a chair and sit for 3.5 hours and watch? I mean, are you having that experience?
It was close to 108 degrees in the Mojave Desert that day, and I had a couple of gallons of water, and I could do the shot as long as I had water. I didn't sit down. I get too nervous. I walk around, and I try not to make any noise. I don't go anywhere near the camera because I might bump it. I did have to change cards because I had cards that could take 57 minutes. So I had, but there's 2 slots, so you can, when one's full, you can put another one in, and you try not to bump the camera when you change those cards. And then it becomes also a problem with battery length, and my battery doesn't last 3, so there's a few places where I had to change batteries also. But you can hook up batteries now to run them longer, and the cards can take more. So the digital is allowing me to do these longer shots to investigate time in a way. So the second film about the train, where the first one, every shot starts with the train entering the frame, and then it ends after the train exits the frame. And there's a little head and tail, so you kind of hear it coming and you hear it going away. But it's constant motion. And it's not about waiting at all, because a train, as soon as it cuts, another train's going to enter. But in the second film, it's also about waiting for the train, which I missed in the first, when I saw the first film. It's just, it's an action film. And this one is more about discipline and the excitement of the train showing up. But 13 trains in 3.5 hours is about every 20 minutes. So, and sometimes they last for 8 minutes, so you don't wait too long. But it's interesting, because when the train comes through, you watch the train, and then when it leaves the train, you might have been watching the train for 8 minutes, then you notice the light change. But when you're just sitting there and there's no train, you don't notice the light change, because it's happening slowly. But if when the train comes in, it's almost like you looked away for 8 minutes, and then when it leaves, you finally see the landscape again. So it's kind of an interesting thing where your attention goes and what takes your attention. But that piece is interesting, because it also is about technology and the change in image making, and about the change in the apparatus and the look of the image. So the two cabins piece is about questioning this kind of technology. And now in the film world, there's such an argument about digital and grain, you know, and there's all these people that are nostalgic for this beautiful grain dancing around. And then I say, you never see grain when you look. Well, why do you, it gets in the way, doesn't it? You know, so I think digital looks more real. Here comes an argument. Yeah. No, I said I'm surprised I don't have a moral question.
Can you describe the moral questions?
Well, it's about murder, right? Yeah. But my president meets on Thursday mornings every, and your president too, I guess, meets on Thursday mornings every week and decides what drones are going to go out to kill people. So if you pay your taxes, you're implicated in that. And sometimes there's also collateral damage. So every time you kill somebody or kill the wrong collateral damage, you're making more people to kill, because they're going to get angry. So it's funny. I mean, I don't believe the way we solve problems in the world. People have a really bad track record. It's not very smart.
One quick question about the title "Decoding Fear." I was wondering if all of the books and the paintings within the two cabinets, do they decode fear, or what does?
Well, I'm not sure if that title, if it's good or not. It wasn't my choice. I don't dislike it, but I think it's narrow compared to what the project's about. And what, I mean, but it is a fear where we're afraid of things, you know, so I'm not afraid of Kaczynski or his ideas. No, I didn't. No. I mean, I think it is what it is. It's a lot of stuff, you know. It's trying to understand, it's like, it's the two cabins are polarizing ideas, but then they also become the same, because when you think about Thoreau, after John Brown was executed, or after they were caught, a number of black participants escaped, and Thoreau and his mother and sister were part of the Underground Railroad that helped slaves get to Canada. And supposedly they helped some of those people from Harper's Ferry get to Canada. So they would be aiding terrorists, basically. And so all of a sudden, it's a different, what is a terrorist and what you know.
We just have room for one last question.
What motivated you to wish Ted Kaczynski happy birthday?
My friend who helped me with the book was very interested in his philosophy and who he was today, and I'm very interested also in what he can say about solitude and about autonomy. Right now he lives in a cell the same size as his cabin. It's 10 feet by 12 feet. There's recessed windows. He's in the Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. You're brought in blindfolded, so you don't even know what floor you're on. And the light is recessed, so he can't see out. And where was I going with that? Oh, well, I was interested in, I know where I was going now, that he's living in this confined cell, and yet he has complete autonomy right now. All he does is do research. He's got a team of 12 people on the outside doing research for him, and he's writing anti-tech literature. So he's completely committed to an anti-tech stand. I occasionally would ask him questions through my friend who's been corresponding with him for 3 years now. And one of the things I was interested in, how he perceived time in there. Because when I worked with a woman that was in prison making a film in the late 80s, and the way she perceived time was much different than mine. And Kaczynski was just the opposite of hers. He felt there wasn't enough time. He was so busy. So he's living in this confined place, so busy that he's created, I don't know, I mean, it's kind of an imaginary revolution that they allow him to write, and he knows he can write up to a point without losing his privileges, right? But he's still creating an autonomy that I think he learned from the wilderness and the autonomy that he had there. So I would really like to, wish he would also write about that, and also about a whole life that was antisocial, basically. And I think he has a lot of important things to say. So because I asked him some of those questions through my friend, at one point I thought I'd write him a birthday card. And then he had such a clever answer, I thought, okay, it seems like something I can play with. Because I also wanted to make him not just a monster, you know, that you have a sense that he's a real person from that birthday card. He killed 3 people. He maimed 6 or 7 more. He sent 20-some bombs through the mail. He was angry. He's not a very nice person, but he's brilliant, you know. So, but like one of the things he says about violence is that if you have a government that uses violence to solve its problems, and you don't use violence against them, you don't have, you know, you're at a disadvantage. And I don't believe in violence, so I think I know what he's saying, but I don't think that's a solution. But either is Thursday morning in the White House, you know, a solution. So. Thank
Thank you.